Sup everyone, Thomas here, aka Reshiram's trainer, and welcome back to another episode of Reshiram Reviews, where we review any games that pique our interest. Today, we'll be looking at another Crab's Treasure, a Souls-like set in an ocean that's ravaged by pollution, which is probably a tongue-in-cheek way to remind us to stop polluting our own damn oceans. Now, I first learned about this game from a Nintendo Direct. Now, I usually don't care about a lot of the games that are revealed during these Directs, unless it's a major release like Zelda. But this one caught my interest. I mean, it's a Souls-like, a genre that's pretty consistently dark and depressing, yet this one seemingly had a bright cartoony look to it. And you play as a crab. What more do I need to say? Let's start with the story. You play as this little guy, Krill, who had his precious shell stolen by this loan shark. And so, you must venture deep into the ocean to get it back. Eventually, you'll reach the city of New Carcinia, where after looking around, you'll eventually find this guy who has your shell. He claims that the shark from before sold it to him, but... Eventually, a trash island floats over the city, dropping a bunch of debris, including the cereal box, that gets mistaken for a treasure map. And you make a deal that if you find that treasure, you can exchange it for your shell back. And so, you head off in search of that treasure. Sounds simple enough. But as you play through the game, the story starts to take a turn, and becomes much darker, more closely resembling other Souls-likes. Speaking of which, the game has plenty of references to other Souls-like that inspired it, like this area known as the Sands Between, or a late game boss that I won't show for spoiler reasons, having some Bloodborne inspiration in his fight, or the fact that you can straight up find the Chosen Undead's helmet in the game as well. You'll even get an achievement for that one. But enough of that. How does the game play? Quite well in my opinion. The game certainly has more platforming than most Souls games, but still has all the stuff you'd expect from a Souls game, like hidden paths and shortcuts to unlock, so you don't have to repeat certain areas. As for the combat, while there are still elements from other Souls-likes, the combat in this game feels more fast-paced to me, which isn't a bad thing, though the combat also has some similarities to Hollow Knight. For one, unlike most Souls-likes, where you can change weapons as you go through the game, here you're stuck with the fork for the whole game. But just like in Hollow Knight, this weapon can be upgraded by using certain items. In Hollow Knight, it was Pale Lore, but here, it's Stainless Relics. Another similarity is that melee isn't the only option. Early on in the game, you'll learn about Umami, which is basically the magic of this game. Or since we're comparing it to Hollow Knight, it's basically identical to Soul, in that you can use it for powerful attacks, but in order to recharge it, you'll need to strike enemies with your melee weapon. However, an aspect of this game's combat that is different to other Souls-likes, to my knowledge at least, is that this game has a skill tree. As you go through the game, you collect these crystals, that you can either find around the world, or drop from bosses and some enemies. These crystals can be used to purchase new upgrades on the skill tree, and some of these are quite useful and can make some fights easier. Now, probably the biggest part of this game's combat that I haven't mentioned yet is the shell system. There's a variety of different shells in this game, each with different stats and skills. Some shells are quite light, allowing you to be agile, but might not be very sturdy and can break easily, while others are heavy, restricting movement, but can tank a hit and then some. Some of them even boost certain stats, like attack or resistance. Something almost all shells have is a shell spell. By using Umami, you can activate your shells as shell spell, which have a variety of effects. Some are strong attacks, where others are more defensive, and some can even heal you. Though the main use of shells is obviously defense. You can hide inside your shell to block attacks, but doing so also depletes the shell's separate health bar, and once the health bar is gone, the shell breaks, and you have to go another one, which can be really stressful in the middle of a boss fight. Speaking of which, the boss fights in this game are actually quite fun for the most part, being challenging but fair. While most are tied to story progression, there are some optional bosses you can find around the map, and even a secret boss, all of which have epic names that feel in line with most other Souls-likes, such as Royal Shell Splitter, Pagurus the Ravenous, and Voltai the Accumulator. And the best part is that if you die to a boss, you're given the option to respawn right before the encounter, instead of back at the last moon shell, which is this game's equivalent to bonfires. But there is one boss I want to talk about real quick. Heikea the Intimidation Crab. He was easily the hardest boss for me on my first playthrough, and it didn't help that he is relatively early in the game, before you've got a chance to properly level up your stats. There's a saying I once heard, where every Souls-like has one boss where if you can beat it, you can beat the whole game. A skill check if you will. In Dark Souls 1, it was Ornstein and Smoke, and in Another Crab's Treasure, that boss is Heikea, so be prepared to fight him. Another aspect of this game that I enjoy is the music, both boss themes and area themes. While most Souls-likes tend to go for a more orchestral soundtrack, Another Crab's Treasure does something different. I couldn't tell you what music genre it is, since I'm not exactly a music expert, but I'll show you a few examples. I feel like I've talked enough about the positives. Now to cover a few of the things I didn't like. The first thing I'll talk about is the amount of areas there are, which isn't many. But don't get me wrong, the areas we got are great and varied. The Shallows is a great starting area, the Expired Grove is literally just kelp forest, and Flotsam Vale is the legally required poison swamp of the game. And each of these areas have their own sub-areas. But in total, we only got 7 areas. Compare that to Dark Souls 1, which has 24 different areas. Now sure, Another Crab's Treasure is an indie game, so they can't be expected to live up to AAA titles. But Hollow Knight is another indie Souls-like, and that had 17 areas. Though in Another Crab's Treasure's defense, it is a 3D game, and the areas we got are quite large. But this ends up being a double-edged sword, and it starts to become exhausting seeing the same environment after a while. Another thing I want to point out is that the map is borderline useless. They go for a more artistic design over an informational one, which wouldn't be a problem if you could still move the damn thing to look around, which you can't. When you open the map, that's all you're allowed to see unless you move somewhere else to open it again. You'll have a significantly easier time navigating the game from the environment and landmarks than you will from the map. Also, it's worth pointing out that this game does have a few bugs still. Most are just really wonky launches. Though this game is barely a week old as of the time I'm recording this. Maybe they'll fix it in the future. I think that just about wraps everything up that I wanted to talk about. So overall, Another Crab's Treasure is a very solid game that stands out on its own against other Souls-likes. If you're looking to get into the Souls-like genre, but are worried about difficulty, then this game is a solid first choice for beginners. Especially since this game actually has an assist mode, to make the game easy if you're struggling. But what would I rate this game? On one hand, it has a great world, with unique bosses and an interesting story. On the other hand, there wasn't a whole lot of variety in terms of different areas, and the map sucked. In the end, I've decided to give this game 4 out of 5 fusion flares. Yes, I still intend on using that as my rating system. But while I might not think this game is perfect, someone else is bound to enjoy it more than I do. After all, this is only my third Souls-like. And if you think this game deserves a 5 out of 5, then that's fine. After all, one crab's trash is another crab's treasure. Oh come on, I had to say it at least once. But that's going to end this review here. Let me know what you think of this game down in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, it would really help the channel out. Have a great day everyone, and I'll see you next time. See ya!